This is a powerful
We're
new
going to
concept.
revolutionize
It's
voice
really all
messages where
about
we
data
want to
collection and analysis.
We need to have an active
Fresh
voice.
ideas are what we
A
fresh
passive
ideas
voice
are what
won't
we
get us
really
where we
need.
want to go.
You are listening to Active Voice with your host Llewellyn King.
My guest today is David Naylor, President and CEO of Rayburn Electric Cooperative, headquartered in Rockwall, Texas, northeast of Dallas. Texas has become something of more than a curiosity, a great laboratory in electricity and in the management of electricity. It also faces some unique problems of its own, particularly the huge growth rate in the population. How are you dealing with that, and how do you feel about Texas being so different in its management of electricity from the rest of the country? Its own network, its own RTO, if you will, separated from the two major grids, that the eastern grid and the western grid, that make up what, when we talk about the grid, we mean.
Yeah, well, that's a big question, Llewellyn. You know, as far as the growth is concerned, I think we just have the mentality that we have to provide the electricity for what's needed, and so as folks keep coming, we keep working however we can to make sure that infrastructure is in place. There's certainly some challenges with that in terms of planning, and you're trying to stay ahead of the game as best you can. Land becomes difficult to obtain. Certainly, the easements for the transmission lines and the distribution lines, and you think about new homes being built. Now you're having to consider are electric vehicles going to be there, and that has an impact on the size of the transformers and the wires. And so you're trying to accommodate those and plan and do the best you can. One of the things we certainly try to do now that we probably didn't do as much in the past is think about the future as far as, can we double circuit the facilities? Can we can't really future proof, but if we can acquire additional land or at least accommodate, make sure the structures will accommodate the changes in conductor sizes and different things along those lines. We're trying to think about have more proactive look into the future as far as, again, just trying to make sure that the growth is met. You definitely don't want to get behind, because then you'll never catch up, at least with the growth that we're seeing. To your second point, with ERCOT being and Texas being its own island, there's pros and cons to that. I know several folks have felt that if ERCOT had been connected during Winter Storm Uri, that it probably wouldn't have been as a bad impact in Texas as it was. But I'm not quite sure that I fall into that camp, because that winter storm was pretty broad reaching, and at least for us, we'd be close to the Southwest Power Pool, and they were having some of their same issues, just not to the same magnitude. There's certainly something to be said too, though, of having local folks involved with the regulation and operation of the ERCOT grid. We can take a trip down to Austin and visit with the regulators, and for us, that's certainly easier than having to take a trip to Washington D.C. So there's pros and cons. We adapt and deal with what we have.
You said double circuit. As a point of clarification, what do you mean by that?
So typically we'll have just one line, if you will, that goes to serve a certain area. But if the growth occurs, then we may want to be able to have a second line that utilizes the same poles. So it allows us to basically double the capacity or the power that we can get to those areas with minimizing the infrastructure. And basically, we don't have to build multiple lines. We can just utilize the same one and increase the bandwidth. It's essentially very similar to adding another lane on a highway.
ERCOT has asked for 40 gigawatts, a giant amount of power, I'm not sure what the time frame is. How would you think that could be met? Would it be with gas? Would it be with a lot more wind? Texas, people don't realize, is one of the leaders in renewables. I think it's got the largest installed wind resource in the country, and it's heavy in solar power. How would it be met if it can be met?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be a mix. I think you can certainly get some solar in the mix and have that in place. But you're going to have gas is going to provide a piece of that and probably a significant portion of that load, just because it's the technology that is there today. It's when you bring and drop in a generator with the gas, then you're able to get more capacity and useful capacity there. It's dispatchable, controllable. I think with the technologies we have and the timing that we're faced with, that gas is going to have to be a key role. To the extent that these things can be pushed off, and that gives the ability to look at other options, such as maybe the small modular nuclear reactors or some of those. But with the urgency that we're seeing, I think gas is going to be a prevalent part of the mix.
Who provides it? ERCOT is a regional transmission organization or an independent system operator. These terms tend to be used interchangeably. And if there's a difference, it's not a very large one. It manages the grid for Texas. It is the grid operator, but it is not itself a utility. It does not generate power. It simply organizes the very complex electric system in Texas, where you have municipals, you have co-ops like yourselves, and you have investor-owned utilities. And on top of that, you have something that much of the country doesn't have, which is independent power retailers. Who in that mix would provide the new generation? Would, for example, ERCOT say to you, David, I think you've got to increase your output, or is that self-evident to you and you're going to do it anyway?
I think it ultimately depends on where that load and where those data centers and the growth occurs. Certainly for us as cooperatives, we have defined territories. And so if they are located in our areas, then we're going to be the ones responsible for that. And to the extent that they locate in other areas of the state that don't have the same defined territories, then they'll have some other options, as far as you may have some independent power producers who step in. The other mix of that is, at least for us at Rayburn, what we're seeing with the ones we're visiting with, they're bringing some of their own generation. I'm not exactly sure where they're all getting it from, but at least in the discussion, they're talking about bringing, having at least some portion of that load being met by generation that's behind the meter. Whether that's gas or even diesel, or in some cases they've got solar contracts, and then we have to supplement that.
These are the data centers we're talking about, the big techs, and they're talking about installing or importing, and they can't import from outside of Texas, so it's from somewhere else in Texas, their own power. Now you also have some constraints in getting power from where it's generated, especially wind power, to where it's needed. Not an unknown problem, the west to east problem. We tend, if we're not in Texas, to think that it's so business friendly that you can do anything you like whenever you want to do it, and the government or the governing bodies will say yes. In fact, you have the same struggle as the rest of the country, not so?
That's correct. I wish we could do whatever we want whenever we want. That'd be nice, but that would certainly lend itself to abuse. We have to go through the same regulatory process, and to build a transmission line, you're talking about at least a year of prep, and then another year to go through the regulatory process, and then you've got the construction on the backside. And that's not to mention you have to deal with the landowners to acquire the right to be able to put the transmission on their property. And property rights, I think, are a concern and a challenge throughout the nation.
You have another problem in Texas, which you seem to be taking the brunt of aberrant weather. You have hurricanes and freezing heat domes. And give it a title, and you've got it in Texas. It hasn't gotten noticeably worse in the past decade or 2 decades.
Yeah, I don't know how many times, Llewellyn, I have heard the word polar vortex. I know to your, 10 years ago, I don't think I'd ever heard of polar vortex, and I think now it's almost an annual occurrence. It's definitely there's definitely more weather events, and they seem to be more extreme. I think part of it too is the system is it's more constrained today than it used to be, and so these weather events have a bigger impact. Whether or not they're worse or better, or whatever the metric is, there used to be a lot more reserves on the system. I mean, the load wasn't near as much. You had more generation. We certainly don't have that situation today. So, some of these storms that come through, they just cause challenges. Now, some of the thunderstorms and winds, that's always been around. We just have more people that are impacted today, and so let's be honest, you can get. We're hearing a lot more about any type of event, or even whether it's social media has a big presence today that didn't have before, and so anything that happens, the magnitude, or at least the volume of information that's presented out there is it's more readily available than it used to be.
As a generator, as a rural electric cooperative association, which is the generating part, the power supply part of the complex thing, which makes up rural electric cooperative operations. What is your interface with ERCOT? Is it a daily business? Are you in constant communication? Is it routine, or is it bespoke every time it's different?
I'd say it's routine, and we interact with ERCOT on a daily basis. And we interact with them both on the generation side and the transmission side. So, generator, we're interacting with the market daily, if not multiple times during the day. The transmission is probably a little less frequent. There's certainly the daily calls to see about the status, and frankly, you hope the conversations and the interaction is minimal, because that means there's nothing happening on the system. And the more that you end up talking to them, particularly on the transmission side, there's probably something going on, and that means that we have to, our guys are having to interact and adapt and do things to make sure that the grid is still staying solid.
Give me an example of the conversations. What would they be talking to you about? What would they say? Would they say we've got a fluctuation in your supply, or something like that?
Yeah, so they may say that the models aren't solving for this afternoon, and there's some uncertainty in the weather, and they want to give everybody an update and just make sure that they're aware that, hey, you may have this coming up where we have to ask you to either stay on. So in the case of our power plant, we may have been planning to take it down at 8 o'clock in the evening, and they're going to say, no, can you please keep it running for another 2 hours? That type of interaction. If another weather event's coming through, or a storm's coming through, they may say, hey, it's this resource, can you either back down because the storm's coming in your way, or we got the storm coming in a different part of the system, so can you increase if you have if you're not already running completely full bore, then can you go ahead and produce a few extra megawatts? The good thing is all those guys are professional, and so there's not any panic or anything in the voices, which you never want to hear in that situation.
Outside of Hurricane Beryl, heat has been the big story. out of Texas. What does heat do to your operation? Your plant gets less efficient, wind power is, the air is thinner, the wind doesn't work as well. What are the other consequences of sustained heat?
I think for us, we're less concerned about the equipment and more concerned about the employees. Our guys, particularly those that are out in the field, they'll probably start their day a little earlier in the morning, getting closer to when the sun comes up as opposed to, normal 8 o'clock start time. We're trying to make sure that they've got coolers, we've got ice machines, and they make sure they fill those coolers up. If they're out in the field, they're taking the breaks that they need to. They're making sure that they have the liquids, the fluids, and of course, again, if they need they certainly don't have to fill their coolers up just at our place. Go to the gas station and get ice. Making sure that they are taken care of, and that frankly that they take care of themselves too, and look out for others. But that's probably the bigger issue for us, is just making sure that the guys and gals that are out there in the field are taken care of. The equipment, you're certainly watching, but by and large, the equipment. Last summer was a pretty long hot summer, and the equipment held up just fine. So you do your maintenance and you check it, particularly when it gets a little less hot. But you're really trying to protect the field guys and making sure that they don't overdo it and they take care of themselves.
What proportion of your line people, those people working outside, are women?
So for us right now, we actually don't have any women. They're all guys. We only have 6 lines. I take that back. We used to just have 6. We have about 10 linemen now, but they're all guys.
Okay, and this is a job which, from time to time, the utility industry says there's a shortage of linemen, but it's a rather well-paid, predictable job with a certain amount of, how can I put it, adventure to it.
Yeah.
Why is it hard to recruit people?
So, that's a good question. I'll tell you what we just started doing. And we actually well, and I look at them and I asked our guys, our HR folks, are we sure we didn't violate any child labor laws? They just graduated from high school, and we created a training program that allows them to learn how to be a lineman and progress up to the journeyman status. So, at least for us, we're trying to take a little more proactive role in recruiting the folks at a younger age, as opposed to just waiting until they're done with high school. Waiting until they're done with their college training or whatever training they got.
You are listening to Active Voice with your host, Llewellyn King.
How is technology impacting the lines and their operation? For example, drones, you don't need men to go down the line the way you used to. How quickly are you advised of a break in a line, for example?
Sure. So we, you talk about drones, we actually have folks at the office now. We probably have 5 or 6 licensed drone pilots. And it's for a variety of reasons. One is, as you said, you can diagnose and troubleshoot. The other is you're trying to make sure, we're trying to improve our mappings. One of the things that you look at with the drones and some of that technology is this, it's LiDAR technology, and, where you can actually get images of the lines and where you're going to build the lines, and you get the depth and the breadth of where you're putting those in. And so the technology there that's available has just been phenomenal, because before you'd have to send a surveyor out, and you'd have to then have a staking crew go out, and now you can you fly it with a drone and you get all this information and digitally and graphically, and so from a design standpoint, it becomes really, really easy to do. Instead of just having lines on a paper, all of a sudden you got images, which is a whole different animal. And certainly for somebody that's not familiar reading the drawings, the images and the pictures, kind of make it a little more real. The other thing that technology is really helping us to do is it allows us to have a more precise diagnostic of where a problem occurs. So instead of just thinking, well, I think, here and we got a problem over here down this line, and you got to look, over a 10-mile section, this technology now we can isolate and pinpoint it. Hey, this thing is, 1.5 miles from the station. And then with our maps that we've interconnected or interrelated with those, and say that's such and such owns that land, and here's the phone number that we can call it so that they're aware that we're on their property. So within our easement, but at least they know what's going on and are concerned about people being, why are all these folks out here? They're giving them a heads up. It actually makes it safer for our linemen too, because this is Texas after all.
You mean they have guns?
Yeah.
From the point that a line breaks, if you have a failure, how long does it take for your control room to know about that failure? Is it almost instantaneous? Is it a minute? Is it a second and a half? What is it?
It's almost instantaneous. They've got as soon as those relays pick up that there's a problem, or the electronics pick that up, our guys are notified immediately, and then they're making calls to the guys out in the field to say, hey, here's a problem, and we start the diagnostic of it.
Do you, in times of emergency, contribute your facilities to other utilities? Is there a lend-lease arrangement between utilities?
So there is definitely a mutual aid type of situation where, if folks need help, then, they'll ask for mutual aid. We're not, for us personally, we're not big enough to be able to really send crews down, because we don't have enough linemen. If something happens to our facilities, if they're gone, then we don't have anybody else to backfill that. But, what we do have is, after the storm has gone through and people are starting to clean up, we got equipment and guys that we can then send, after that emergency to help, certainly in our areas. And our member cooperatives, they help others as well. In fact, this last storm, and we had a little storm before Beryl hit, and Beryl didn't necessarily hit us direct, but our guys sent 2 or 3. I think we had probably all total about 4 or 5 crews that our members sent to other cooperatives that were hit by Hurricane Beryl to help them get the lights back on.
I'm interested in what is the future for employment in electric utilities. We hear that artificial intelligence is going to subtract jobs, particularly in things like customer service, weather forecasting. Have you seen, or are you contemplating the impact of artificial intelligence in various aspects of your operation?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, we do not see we're not seeing a retraction of employees by any stretch. We hired 23 people last year, and we're probably well on track to about that same number this year. But artificial intelligence is definitely something that we're looking at and trying to leverage. I mean, there's a lot of complex models trying to forecast what the load is going to be in the next few days, what the weather is going to be, and they're all related. And so mathematically, or at least statistically, or probabilities, all that comes into play as we're trying to anticipate what's the load going to be tomorrow, so we know how to operate our power plants and to maximize those values. We're looking at artificial intelligence as well to try to help tell us, well, what are the homes that are being built? What's that electricity profile going to look like? How's that adapt? and how can we, look at distributed resources as well. All that kind of comes into play, and AI definitely has a role in that. And then, if we're going to leverage the AI, we've got to have people that can effectively speak that language and translate it for the rest of us that aren't quite sure what that means.
Distributed resources, do you manage those yourself, or do you work through an outside party, like, for example, Home Renew or some other company offering DER services?
So right now we're managing that internally. Our members are leveraging those programs, and Rayburn is helping provide the support that we need and we can we put it all on a common platform to utilize it to meet the market needs or reduce the impact and frankly, save that cost. You go back to, what we're talking about earlier, Llewellyn, with all this load growth. We're trying to tackle that problem on two sides of the equation, both the supply side, but then also the load side. And so distributed resources, they reduce the amount of load that we have to serve, which is effectively the same as adding new generation. So, we're tackling on both sides, and we're working to manage that ourselves.
As a percentage, how much difference is DER making to your load? Is it 5%, 10%?
Right now, we're probably in that 10% range.
That's quite high. And as your customer base is primarily, I understand, residential, that means people really are signing up and trying.
Well, there's nothing like extended outages from Winter Storm Uri to encourage people to put standby generators in, and folks are getting a little more receptive to that. So the challenge for us, as much as anything, is to leverage that into our program. And the other thing that's going on too, Llewellyn, it's not just the homes. We are very much, like you said, we're 90% of our members are residential, but these commercials that are coming in, so we've got some Walmarts and Home Depots and Amazons that are, starting to locate in our areas, and distributed resources for them makes an impact and has a pretty good bang for the buck as well. Being able to put in generators at those locations to ensure those stores stay on and open, and that, again, that solves the power supply, or at least helps solve the power supply equation for us.
Utilities have an obligation to serve, to provide electricity. There's no option of saying no if a new development is built in your service area or one of your members' service areas, or a new data center shows up. How much advance warning do you need to find the extra power to accommodate a large chunk of new load?
So if it's homes, then usually we're able to accommodate that fairly, I won't say fairly easily, but new homes tend to stagger in load, and Llewellyn, we've been dealing with, for us in our territory, 1,000 home development is actually small. We got a lot of them that are 5,000, 10,000 homes that are, going in at once. So that's actually part of our regular planning. It's not the developments that necessarily causes as much of a challenge as it is the large loads where you have, like a data center where you're dumping 1,000 megawatts all at once. Those are the ones that are more challenging. We've been dealing with the developments for, at least again for us. That's been an ongoing process for several years now, and so I won't say we're used to it, but we kind of have a feeling of, we know what to expect.
Data centers are a two-edged sword for a utility, aren't they? It's lovely, steady load, good, profitable load, predictable load, and yet you've got to meet it. They're not easy to cut off. Is this an absolute requirement that you provide service 24/7 to data centers? Is that part of the supply contract?
So it is. I mean, again, we have the obligation to serve doesn't discriminate, and so we have to work through those. What we're seeing though is while they don't, there's a little bit of a challenge, and we found while they would love to stay on all the time, they actually recognize they have to come off some of the time. And so, as long as we can work with that some of the time coming off in those extreme pricing events or extreme weather events, some of them along those lines, where we can stagger those or work through that, then it becomes less of a challenge, and something we can definitely work through. So while it's not like the old interruptible rates and loads that we used to have back in the day, where you just you would open them up and no big deal with an hour notice. And that's not the case here, but there is enough flexibility that so far we've the discussions that we've had to date anyway. And now again, we don't have any on our system, but we're talking to several of them. They seem to be something we can work through.
As a final question, are you misunderstood? And let me explain that question. If a manufacturer has a new product or changes or tries something different, they can shut down and retool. They don't have to be in continuous service, but a utility is more like air traffic control. I've said that quite often. You park all the airplanes simultaneously while you have a meeting. How does that change the culture, the ethos inside a utility?
Yeah, so I thought you were going to ask my wife that question about if I misunderstood or not.
I will do that at some time.
What's interesting, Llewellyn, I mean, to your question though, there is a changing dynamic within the employment force of the utility. I mean, we used to be heavy on the baby boomers. Now we got a lot of millennials. We've got a lot more Gen Zs that are coming in. And of course, you got the Gen Alphas that are right there waiting in the wings. And they bring a different dynamic and a different way of thinking and embracing the technology. And they're more receptive to I'll say they like to have the control, and they see the value, or at least seem to appreciate the value of some of these these distributed programs, and being able to save money. I mean, they think differently than those of us that have been around for maybe more years than we care to admit.
I want to leave you, David, with a thought that I have, and that is that basically people in the electric industry are happy people because they're providing something that their customers need. And that tends to change people's attitude to their work. For example, an ophthalmologist once said to me, when I said, your trade as a whole, ophthalmology, seems to be rather happy compared to other trades, other parts of medicine, like an oncologist. And he said, I think we are. That is because we help people. Some people go blind, but very few. If you can't see, we give you some eyeglasses. If you've got something stuck in your eye, we take it out. And I think some of that happiness extends into utilities, where the work is enormously worthwhile, because people are better off for having electricity than not having it. Do you think that that is a pervasive presence in your undertaking?
I think that's a very astute observation. Folks enjoy what they do, and they like to make a difference. And it's an exciting time to work in the electric industry.
It's a very exciting time. David, thank you for taking time out from that work to be with me for what has been, for me, a fascinating conversation. Thank you.